Yo, I wanted to tune in today and have a conversation that I think every business owner needs to be thinking about, especially as we're moving into 2023, and have this conversation because every year in business is not going to be a growth year. And I want us to normalize that experience, and I want us to have a frank conversation about it. Okay. Now, listen, if you are somebody who is in a position where you feel like, okay, I've been experiencing growth year over year over year, and this may be the first year of your business where you're like, I need a maintenance year, we are going to be having a really, really good conversation about. Today, I wanted to talk about why it is so important to understand whether or not you are having a growth year of your business or whether or not you're having a maintenance year in your business. I think what ends up happening in this online education space is that what gets normalized is that every single year we're supposed to have exponential growth. That every year we're supposed to be doubling in revenue, doubling in profit, tripling in revenue, experiencing just like this upward linear growth format, which is that does end up happening, but that cannot happen for forever. I think that we need to start normalizing what it looks like to have a maintenance year and how to rest in that as a CEO so we do not feel this internal conflict that we always need to be producing and that we always need to be in harvest season. So one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that every industry, every business goes through economic cycles. There's an economic cycle that is happening at a larger global scale, but then by industry, there's economic cycles that happen in individual industries. And I think in the online education space, at least from my experience of being full-time in this industry since 2017 and experiencing this industry since about 2015, I think that the online education space has a business cycle of about 3 to 4 years. So every 3 to 4 years, there's a nice little reset. And I think as the CEO of your business, you also have to understand part of your responsibility is being able to weather the ebbs and flows of the economic business cycles that you are experiencing and how the larger economy is impacting your industry at large. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that last year for me was a maintenance year. It was an intentional strategic decision for me not to put fuel on the fire of my business. It was a year of improving my systems, standardizing my operational infrastructure, really enhancing my automations, being more effective with delegation, and really making strategic investments in my business. And now I'm having conversations with my clients who they're going right now through a maintenance year, and it's like hard for them to settle into it. So the biggest thing that I want us to start to dissect here is when do you need to be in a growth year versus when are you in a maintenance year, and kind of what does growth look like in each of those seasons of business? And how can you start to be more proactive and be more conscious with your decision making, depending on what season of business that you are in? So one thing in particular that I think a lot of us are experiencing as we're moving into 2023 is that we really do need to expand our definition of what success looks like and expand our definition and pay attention to growth in ways that are not just related to revenue. So many of us only think about revenue. How much revenue are we bringing in? How much profit are we bringing in? How many new leads have we generated? How many new clients have we enrolled? And yes, that is important, but a sophisticated CEO will tell you that revenue is only one metric of your business. It is not the only metric in your business. And sometimes many of us get into this rat race where we allow revenue or we allow maybe a particular launch revenue to be this artificial god in our business. If you feel like everything is reliant on one launch, everything is reliant on the revenue from 1 year, you're not looking at your business in a holistic sense. You're probably looking at your business as a cash flowing hustle. And I think at some point, you as a CEO and you as a business owner, your perspective on how you view your business needs to evolve. And you need to start looking at your business beyond just month to month increments and start viewing your business holistically on a year to year cadence, on a 3-year cadence, on a 5-year cadence. Because I think sometimes when we get caught up in that rat race of like my entire business, or at least the emotional experience that I'm having in my business is just reliant on how successful or unsuccessful one launch was, or how successful or unsuccessful 1 year of revenue was, we're thinking too short term in our business, and we're not thinking about our business in economic cycles, in those business cycles that I just was sharing about earlier. So at some point, I think after maybe 3 or 4 years of you being in business, like your identity as a business owner and how you perceive and view your business needs to expand to a larger time frame. And that's why, this conversation of am I in a growth year or am I in a maintenance year is so important, because I, for one, have gone through the economic cycle and gone through a growth cycle versus a maintenance year cycle. And you might be coming up to a now where you need to go on a maintenance cycle, but you're not giving yourself permission to do so. So I want us to really break down these nuances, okay? So first thing here is, how do you know it's time to go into a maintenance cycle? If your business has been experiencing more than 50% growth for more than 3 years in a row, you are absolutely overdue for a maintenance cycle, for a maintenance year, for a maintenance season. I think that if you're growing by 30 to 50% or more consecutively for 3 years in a row, your maintenance cycle is going to be coming up on you, or your business is going to force you to go into maintenance because you operationally cannot continue to sustain the pace at which you've been growing. I really hope that sinks in. So look at your cash flow, look at your growth year over year over the past 3 to 5 years and literally chart it out. So you can literally Google percentage growth calculator and put in what was your revenue in 2018, what was your revenue in 2019, what was that percentage growth? 2019 to 2020, what was the percentage growth? 2021, 2022, what was the percentage growth? So on and so forth. And actually look at how much percentage-wise has my business grown in top-line revenue, then what percentage-wise has my business grown in profit year over the last 3 to 4 years. If you have experienced more than 30 to 50% growth consecutively for 3 years or more, you are probably due for a maintenance year. And the reason why I say that is because if you are like me, where you are probably a solopreneur, you might have some part-time, contractors on your team. Maybe you have an extra 20 to 40 hours of of labor that you're paying for, whether that's an employee or whether that's a contractor. I can guarantee you your operational systems on the back end are not growing in their stability or in their strength at the pace at which you're growing on the front end. And that is really normal. That I want to say that's normal. That's a normal experience. That is a normal dynamic. But at some point, you're going to have to tend to what's going on behind the scenes. So that's a really good indicator of whether that you need to be in a maintenance year, is if you've been experiencing consistent exponential growth, meaning you've been growing by more than 30 to 50% year over year for 3 or more years consecutively back to back. The other thing that I want to maybe break down about this dynamic here is that outside of just knowing when it's time to be in a maintenance year, your economic season does not start until you have planted a seed. So I think sometimes people think they need to always be in a growth season, but they're not really distinguishing between when have I actually started my harvest? When have I actually started planting seeds in the soil to produce a harvest? And this is something I do want to break down, okay? If you are in a season right now where you have just been researching about starting a business, thinking about starting your business, you have not yet initiated the beginning of your economic cycle. So if you're in the earlier stages of your business where you feel like maybe you've been thinking about building your business for the last 2 years, you've been thinking about starting your business for the last 3 years, until you have actually planted the seed, meaning you've made an actual invitation for somebody to work with you, your cycle has not yet started. So once you have gotten your first paid client or you've been making active invitations to actively sell, that is the beginning of your economic cycle for your particular business. So that's something I do want to distinguish, because I think sometimes people might be like, well, I've been doing this for like 5 years or 7 years. And it's like, but have you? Like, when did you actually start selling versus when you were just maybe researching, planning, and preparing? And the comparison that I want to give for you guys too is like looking at the actual cycles of an actual harvest of farming. And I took some notes here because I think this is really, really important. But if you look at the farming dynamic, right, there is seed time, which happens usually in the spring, where that is where they're, preparing the soil, they're planting the seeds, they're putting pesticides down, and the seed time is where they're really doing the work. Like that is probably in your first 3 years of business, your first 3 years are going to feel like seed time because you are planting the seeds, you are doing the work, you are, preparing the soil, you are putting pesticides down, like you are risk management, like you don't know what you're doing, but you're figuring it out. And I think like the first 3 years of my business were literally seed time. because I was just trying to learn how to, one, plant the seed, learn what seeds I needed to plant. I was testing out different crops, testing out different offers. So that season lasts a while. And I think a lot of the time people quit the seed time too fast and too soon before they even get to a chance where they can start to experience the fruits of the labor. And I always say that when you're starting a brand new idea, if you're launching a new offer, it's probably going to take you 3 years of you tending that one particular business model and tending that one particular offer before you really start to see traction. If you're unwilling to test an offer or test an idea for 3 years, I would say do something else, because I don't know any business. And when I say test an offer, I mean like testing the nature of a particular business model. If you're not willing to give it 3 years, you're not giving it enough time to actually grow roots. And if we think about planting actual crops or planting flowers or planting trees or planting anything, if you keep uprooting the seed before it has time to actually grow roots and stabilize in its environmental condition, you're never really giving it the opportunity to experience growth. So there's that seed time where we're actually planting the seeds, preparing the soil, putting pesticides down so we can do some risk management. And then we go into the harvest. The harvest, and I think, again, for me, I feel like I was in seed time for about 3 years. And then I really started to experience a harvest, meaning that my business tripled in 1 calendar year. There was such an influx of new leads being generated, and there was such an influx of consistent client results from those leads. Like everything was just booming. I feel like everything that I was doing, no matter what, it was just going to be successful because I had done my seed time for about 3 years. I think from 2016, 2017, 2018, that was like my real seed time. 2019, 2020 was like my glow up year. It was the year where we tripled in revenue. I really solidified my core offer. And, I was making more profit than I had ever seen. It was the beautiful dynamic of all this hard work that was put into place, it starting to actually grow. And during the harvest season, that is where I think, I heard Pharrell say this before, that people think that making the ask is the hard part. Planting the seed is the hard part. Planting the seed is not the hard part of the process. Managing and tending the harvest is the hardest part of the process. Because during the harvest, that's usually when people don't want to do the hard work anymore because of how much hard work they had to do in the seed time. But your harvest season is going to be, I feel like, your most rigorous work season because you're now having to manage all of this growth that you have been able to create. And growing is one thing, but being able to manage and maintain the growth is another thing. And I think in the online education space, a lot of the time what ends up happening, this is where we see a lot of business owners break. If you've seen a lot of coaches that you admire or course creators that you admire, they had these massive years, and especially in 2020, 2021, a lot of people had the biggest years they've ever had in their life. But the issue is that now you see some of them pulling back, reining in, their offers are changing, their business models are changing, and it's primarily because they had a massive harvest, but they operationally were not prepared to manage the amount of growth that their business experienced. And that is like a hard learning lesson as a business owner, to be able to regulate, not only regulate what needs to be managed in the business, but to regulate yourself, to regulate your nervous system, to regulate your own emotions and your own expectations that you place on yourself. Because I think especially if you are similar to my journey or similar to some of these other individuals' journeys, they're used to only experiencing up, growth, everything's good, make more sales, get more leads, like we're making more money. We had the biggest year we've ever had. We popping bottles, we playing ace of spades, like we out here just balling. But then what ends up happening is the harvest, the work of the harvest kicks in, and it's like, wait a minute, I have to manage the growth and deliver on the thing that I sold all these people into. And it's like, oh, fuck, wait a minute, wake up call. Like that's a whole other part of the work that many business owners aren't prepared to handle if they've been experiencing exponential growth year over year. Because if you're in a growth season, that's where majority of your effort and attention is going to be going. You probably don't even have the capacity individually or the capacity on your team to simultaneously be working on the back end operations while you're also managing this massive influx of new leads, new clients, and new enrollment. So that harvest season is, I think, I know for me, in my experience, that harvest season was around 2020, 2021, where it was just, it was just like spiritual alignment. The offer was solid. The marketing was solid. The efforts were solid. The delivery was solid. Like, it was just flowing. And that was the year that I broke $1 million in revenue. And then the following year broke $1 million in profit in one calendar year. That was the biggest harvest. But now when we think about after the harvest, nobody talks about cover crops. When I say nobody talks about it, I mean in the sense of this analogy, but also in the sense of business. People do not talk about the essence of what cover crops are and why it's so important for you as a business owner to know when it's time to plant cover crops. So cover crops are non-cash crop that is grown in addition to primary cash crops. Literally go Google this, because so much of like the cycles of farming is very reflective, in my opinion, to the cycles and seasons of our business. But when you think about cover crops are non-cash crops that are grown in addition to the primary cash crops, meaning that these cover crops are grown purely just to help with soil erosion, help improve soil health, to help cover the soil, control pests, and they're done usually around the time of right before the harvest or right after a harvest. And the farmers plant these cover crops to add nutrients back into the soil so that during the next season, the soil can be fruitful. And I think a lot of us as business owners, we will run ourselves ragged, trying to be in a growth season where we never actually re-add the nutrients that are necessary so that our soil can be fruitful during the next harvest season. We're just burning our own individual batteries. We're not resting. We're not recharging as individuals. And we're also not allowing our business to do the same thing, where it can rest, where it can recharge, where it can recoup. And, we have to add nutrients back into the soil. So that's what I mean by this maintenance year, because at some point you're going to have to put maintenance measures in place to make sure that your business is actually can handle and can sustain all the growth and all the output that it's been experiencing. And then after we go through cover crops, that's when we go into recovery season. And that's usually wintertime for the farming industry, where that's where they fix the machinery or they work on other projects on the farm. That is where they're making investments into the farm for the following season. They're buying seeds in advance for next season's crops. They are buying equipment in advance for next season's crops. So when we think about ourselves in business, and I want you to think about yourself, have you been in a seed time? Have you been in a harvest? Are you currently in a season where you need to be strategically laying cover crops to add nutrients and to refuel the soil? Or do you need to be in a season of rest and recovery and intentional pause where you are not growing crops, where you are not taking on new clients, where you are just working on the infrastructure, improving the equipment, taking vacations and recharging yourself and resting your actual body from the labor that you have been putting yourself through? And I think that 2023 for a lot of us is going to be a maintenance year and not a growth year. Because I think if you're an online coach or you're an online creator or you've been always kind of working from home even prior to 2020, I think many of us are experiencing the delayed effect of everything that I think most of the world experienced during 2020. Like, I know for me, I didn't really feel the effect of quarantine and feel the effect of the overwhelming amount of grief and sadness and depression, and all those emotions did not come out for me until 2022. And I think it was because while the world was shutting down, my business was growing. And then while the world was shutting down and people lives were, heavily changing, mine changed too. But I was so busy in a harvest season that I didn't really have the time to even tap into my emotions or really process my feelings and my emotions and my thoughts that were there, but I didn't have the capacity to honor them or to experience them or to work through them. And 2022 was the year I was like, girl, you can't keep running. You've been basically outworking yourself and outrunning your emotions, and now it's all caught up to you. So at some point, you're probably going to need a maintenance year and need that cover crop season and need a chance to just allow your business to recover from the growth that it has been experiencing so that you can prepare yourself for the next season. So I wanted to give you some examples of what does growth versus maintenance activities look like. So when I think about maintenance season, I think about 5 different categories, okay? When I think about maintenance season, I first think about system standardization. So one of the things that we've been doing last year, which was a maintenance year for me, and a maintenance, let me say something too. A maintenance year doesn't mean that your business doesn't still cash flow, that your business still doesn't make money, that your business may still even experience growth, but I just mean that you're not intentionally putting efforts behind it, your business having exponential growth. Like, I think 3 to 10% annual growth year over year is like normal. That is like a normal amount of growth. That is like the expected amount of growth in most business industries. If you grow by 3 to 10% year over year over year, you're probably like, okay, like we're having nice like incremental growth. It's not breaking anything. Everything is not going astray. But when you start experiencing like, again, 30, 50% growth or more, that to me is an intentional growth year where you are doubling your size, tripling your size. Like that is to me is massive growth. And anytime that you're experiencing that amount of growth, your back-end operations break. Because if you go from making $300,000 a year to the following year making $800,000, all the systems that you had in place that worked well at $300K no longer will work well at $800K. If you go from $800K to $1.5 million, like the systems, your identity, the quality of your leadership, all the stuff that worked at $800K, all of those systems and your approach to how you solve problems and decision-making will have to evolve and be restructured for 1.5. I hope that makes sense, like that analogy, but like if you're growing by more than 30 to 50% in a year, that is definitely a growth year. That is exponential growth, and that also means that pretty much a lot of your systems or standardization or your operations is going to need to have a massive up level. That level requires new infrastructure. So the first thing, like I said, if you're in a maintenance year, is that system standardization. So for me, I've been experiencing I've doubled and or tripled every year in my business from 2017 to 2021. So there was a lot of standardization that I had to put in place over this past year to make sure that my business was in a healthy position. So examples of system standardization as an online business coach is standardizing my client delivery, standardizing my client onboarding, standardizing my program curriculum, standardizing the messaging and the qualifiers of how we define an Olympian and how we define an ideal client, standardizing the touch points that we make with clients during the client experience, basically standardizing all of the recurring activities of my business, not new initiatives, just recurring responsibilities. So there was a lot of system standardization that I had to put in place over the past year to really create some more operational efficiency in the business. So during a maintenance year, that might be your growth area. So your growth might not be how do I get 100% more new leads, but your growth in a maintenance year might look like what are 2 to 3 systems that we need to standardize around marketing and around lead gen, around how we lead sales conversations and standardizing our actual sales process, lead qualification process, standardizing the client delivery with the curriculum, with the client onboarding, with the client touch points, or standardizing something that you're doing operationally in the business, how you delegate, how you hire, or just recurring functions that happen on an ongoing basis. So your growth may not be about new revenue, but your growth is around operational efficiency. So that's the first type of activity that you can do during a maintenance year that is still absolutely growth, but it's growth with a different metric in mind. The second one is automations. If you're running an online business and if you keep having these types of growth, at some point you need to look at what am I manually doing? What are we manually doing that could be automated using Zapier, workflows, or different types of software automations? So like, for example, for us, something that we have automated over the past year was when clients finish a lean launch in our program, part of our curriculum, clients go through the process of completing a lean launch. And when they finish that lean launch, they submit their lean launch data. We review that data. And when we review that data, that allows us to unlock the next phase of our curriculum for them. But at the time, that process wasn't fully automated. And there was a lot of manual steps of that process that somebody, either I or somebody on my team was doing. And what we did is we looked at, okay, what are some of those, again, recurring responsibilities of the business? What are things that we're doing manually to fulfill that process? And are there things that we can be doing, software that we can be using to help automate aspects of that process so that now a human being doesn't need to do it? Like another thing that I automated was trying to improve our company culture. And one of the things I automated, there is a really cool bot that connects with Slack. so that it will tell you a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance when somebody on your team, when their birthday is. Now, that was something that I was manually paying an executive assistant to manage, but now I was able to automate that, get that off of my EA's plate, and actually automate the reminders of when my team members are having birthdays so that we can celebrate proactively. Like those little things, even outside of automation, even outside of my business, I started automating the recurring activities of my personal life. And as a business owner, if you're the CEO and you're running a business where you're basically the one-woman show or the one-man show, your personal life impacts your professional life. So I started automating recurring activities in my personal life. I started automating when my housekeeper came. So I just put her on a recurring schedule versus me having to like manually call her and like schedule it every time we wanted the house cleaned. I started automating my grocery delivery. So I paid attention to what are the things that I'm always buying, you know, like those kind of staples that we have in our kitchen and then the staples that we have in our fridge. So now that's like built into my Amazon Prime, my Whole Food delivery, and built into my Shipped app. So now that those things just every 2 weeks, I already know exactly what I need to buy. I started buying pressed juices and getting into pressed juices. And there's a store in town called Pressed, and they can do the delivery of those pressed juices. So like now just every other week, it's on autopilot. So look at where, even in your personal life, you can be automating other activities that you're doing, like getting my dog, going to the groomers, like automate. And I mean by automate, I just mean put it on a recurring cadence so you don't have to think about it. You just know it has to happen. Building into a cadence of consistency of when things will take place is another way that I think about automation. So all of like my beauty routine, getting my lashes done, all of that, those happen on the same day at the same time on the same recurring basis. So your maintenance year might be business stuff, but it could be personal things that need to be automated and need to be taken into consideration so that you can be performing and functioning at the highest level possible. Because if you are not functioning at your highest, you're not giving your business the highest. The third thing is delegation. And this is something that I talk about this a lot with my mastermind clients, because I think delegating and team hiring when you are an online business, also you're still kind of in a startup phase. And it's so different than what I personally learned when I was in corporate America. You know, how we hire and how we delegate and what gets delegated is, to me, it's a totally different approach than if you come from a corporate background. You cannot apply Fortune 500 companies to a startup online coaching business. Like, they do not matriculate well. So when I think about delegation, I start to think about, okay, what are recurring functions of the business? Basically recurring tasks that always need to happen versus what are project-based things that need to take place. And I started really clumping those two things into two different categories. So what are my recurring tasks? Like responding to emails, that's a daily recurring task. Responding to comments on social media, daily recurring task. Scheduling content on social media, daily recurring task. Versus project-based tasks. And I really started to look like, what are those project-based tasks that I can get off of my plate and delegate by hiring a project-based contractor before I'm ready to make a permanent hire with like a full-time employee or a contractor that's on a retainer. And that really helped me, again, start to create capacity. And then you can start to see, especially if you're new to delegation or new to managing people, I always recommend start with project-based delegation, because you can really define a clear scope of work, define clear deliverables, have one set price, and then just deploy that versus like hiring somebody because you're in a panic mode and you're like, I can't do all this by myself anymore. But you really don't know what you're going to be giving them to do, which to me is a lot harder if you're like new to delegating or new to handing things off your plate. So project-based hires and being strategic with where you're making delegation is something else that you can be doing in maintenance mode. When you're in a maintenance year, you can be looking at, okay, what are some core things, core projects that we need to make enhancements on, make improvements on, and can I just hire one person for a VIP day, or can I hire one person for a short-term stint to just focus on the completion of this project? So in a maintenance year, you might be doing some form of delegation. In a maintenance year, you also might be making strategic investments. Even if you're in a maintenance year, I think you should still be investing in your own skill development, in your own development as the CEO, and also be making strategic investments in the business based off of your cash flow, based off of your projections. That's why I said strategic, because sometimes what ends up happening a lot with business owners is They just look at, oh, I have money in my account. I'm going to just spend it and because I'm investing in my business. That's not a strategic investment if you don't know why you're making that investment, why you're making it right now, what the definition of success looks like what is the expected outcome that you want to have as a result of making this investment. You need to be able to articulate that and understand that, and also understand, do I have the cash flow to make this investment? And what is the expected return on investment for me making this financial decision? Those are things that you should be taking into consideration. But during a maintenance year, that's probably what you're going to be doing. For example, last year, I made a lot of strategic investments in my team development, trying to figure out who are the right people that need to be in the right seats for the type of work that I know that we are currently doing and need to be doing down the line. So strategic investment I made last year is that I hired a full-time marketing coordinator and spent a lot of my energetic time nurturing that relationship, investing in that relationship, training, delegating, us getting on the same wavelength. I also made a full-time hire last year during my maintenance year of hiring a enrollment coordinator, then a person that's over our client success department. A client success enrollment coordinator is her title. And that was a strategic investment. I was investing in an actual full-time salaried employee. I invested in developing an employee handbook because I have now 2 full-time employees on my team. It was me investing again time to train this individual to standardize our operating system so that they could be trained on what they had to do. So those might be strategic investments. Another strategic investment is investing in a coach, investing in training, investing in skill development for yourself is another form of strategic investment. So those are and personally, even making strategic investments, I hired a naturopath doctor because I'm investing in my nutritional health and my physical health this year. I invested in getting my dental work done. I spent thousands of dollars doing fillings, getting a root canal, and investing in Invisalign. That was an investment in me as a business owner and investing in myself, which was a strategic investment for what goals I was setting for myself for the following year. And I did that during a maintenance year. And the 5th type of thing that you might be doing during a maintenance year is investing in your emotional stability and your emotional regulation. Because again, as the CEO of your business, you hold a lot. You carry a lot of weight as a CEO. And it's a lot to manage. It's a lot to regulate. It's a lot. And investing in your emotional stability is probably one of the most important investments out of all the other ones that I've mentioned. It's the most important. So when you think about investing in your emotional stability, that might mean creating space for you to just go on a vacation if you've never taken one. That might be investing in therapy or personal development so that you can iron out and work through and learn different tools to regulate your emotions and regulate your mental well-being. It might be hiring a naturopath doctor or following up on all of your doctor appointments. Whatever it might mean for you to just make sure that you're emotionally stable, emotionally healthy, emotionally in tune. That's something that you might need to be very intentional on during a maintenance year. I really hope that this gave you a perspective that growth is not always just about top line revenue. It is in the beginning, but at some point, if you've been experiencing 30 to 50% annual growth year over year for 3 years or more in a row, at some point you're going to need to go into a maintenance mode. And that maintenance mode is your business is still growing. It's just it's growing with different metrics in mind. So you're growing in operational efficiency. You're growing in operational predictability. You're growing in standardization of your program, of your offers, of your marketing, of your messaging, of your sales. Standardizing and systematizing what needs to happen is so important. And the last thing I'll say is that you don't need to go into maintenance mode too soon. Maintenance mode is good to go in after you've experienced a harvest and after you've experienced a harvest on a consistent basis. So sometimes if you're earlier stage in your business, or maybe not even earlier stage, but you're trying to avoid the work of the harvest and you just try to skip the harvest and go into maintenance mode, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. There's no point in fixing equipment or standardizing processes if you haven't actually experienced growth and you're not producing cash flow on the front end. So I just want to say that because I know somebody might be thinking, oh, I don't want to do the work of the harvest, which some business owners will try to avoid doing because it's uncomfortable. Nailing your messaging, nailing your marketing, nailing lead generation, nailing how you lead a sales conversation, nailing that act. Sometimes people will try to skip that activity and just go into, I want to improve my processes and improve my systems and improve my operations, baby, that's not necessary if we're not making money on the front end and there's enough cash flow where that amount of cash flow is causing an issue with how we are delivering the functionality of what we just sold, right? Nothing to automate if you ain't got no cash flow coming in. There's nothing to systematize if you are not making consistent sales. So the reason of maintenance mode is really a byproduct or an afterthought. It is the next thing that you need to prioritize after you've experienced a harvest. So I really hope this gives you some perspective on when you're thinking about your year, or if you've been wrestling with like, I don't know, this is the first year of my business where I don't have a growth goal from a revenue perspective. That might be okay, because you might need to be in maintenance mode and you might need to focus on other metrics beyond just revenue. So I really hope this was helpful. I would love to just answer some questions if you guys have any. So pop any questions you guys have in the comments. Let me know. But I really hope this was helpful, because nobody talks about maintenance years enough. I think so many of us have this expectation or perception that every year has to be like Cardi B, and it's up and it's up and it's up, and then it gets stuck. She said that too. And at some point, either you're going to have to slow down or your business will force you to slow down. Or, what ends up negatively happening is when you see people have these mass exodus of clients, where their clients all leave their program at the same time. And it is because probably they could not deliver on the demand that they had generated, because they didn't have enough time, or they did not prioritize strengthening the maintenance and the operational infrastructure of their business. And that's both are your responsibility as a business owner. Both ends of the token. So let me pause here for a second. Are there any questions, comments? What did you love? What did you enjoy? Hey, JCM accountant, she said, yes, you can't automate without cash flow. Big facts. There's nothing to automate. You're just tinkering with systems at that point. Tawana said, these are the things that many business owners need to sustain their business. 100%. And I think just sometimes when we're growing our businesses, we just have this expectation that well, I think too, it's not even that we have an expectation. If you're growing your business and you're just getting started, you don't know what you don't know. So that's why I created this episode, to help normalize the experience versus us shaming ourselves or feeling bad about it, or not really understanding why we're going through what we're going through. What I'm talking about now is probably a more sophisticated issue down the line. Like I said, you don't really need to worry about maintenance mode unless you've been in a season where you've been experiencing 30 to 50% in annual growth year over year for 2 or 3 years or more. And if you're not in that boat, you're still in seed time and harvest. You don't need to be worrying about maintenance mode and no cover crops. You need to be worrying about, how do I plant these seeds? How do I get the soil ready? And how do I get these sales? But if you've been experiencing 30 to 50% growth year over year for probably 2 to 3 years or more, that's when we need to start thinking about cover crops and adding these back into the soil and going into a maintenance year for sure. Can I name the season of the business? Yeah, it's seed time. Really what most people do is there's a season of research. To me, that doesn't start the seasons. But then there's seed time, there's harvest, there's during harvest, or usually right before harvest or right after, they will put down cover crops. And there's the season of rest and recovery and recharging. Let me see if there's any other comments or questions. I'm so glad that you guys like this episode. There's a lot of positive comments. Any other questions you guys have? Let me see. As an avid gardener and environmentalist, I love these analogies. I hope I'm getting them right. I know very little about agriculture. Pauline said, when you were a baby business, do you advise going to shorter periods or seasons of maintenance? I think when you're in the beginning stages of business, and what I mean by probably baby business or beginning stages, meaning if you're making less than $100,000 a year, there is no maintenance mode at that point. In my opinion, because the business hasn't really even proven that it is a business yet. I think sometimes people will define, okay, I have a business because I have an LLC and because I'm thinking about starting my business, or I'm quote unquote working on building my business. But if your business is making less than $100,000 a year, you are 100% in seed time. You are actively working on making invitations, and sales. I think that if you're making less than $100,000 a year, the only thing that you need to be focused on is identifying what is a skill set that you currently have, that people already associate you with, that you can be selling to solve a problem for somebody else. So if you're making less than $100,000 a year, there's nothing to maintain because you have not yet built anything yet. There's nothing created. There is not consistent cash flow. Like, there is no cash flow maybe coming in. But if you're making less than $100,000 a year, you are definitely planting seeds. Like, you are digging soil. You are doing the hard work. Like, you're doing the work that many people want to avoid. The only skill set that I would recommend developing at that stage is really learning the art of sales, learning the psychology of sales, and really learning how to identify what is that skill set that I have and how do I articulate my value around it? How do I speak about my skill set and how it solves a problem for somebody else with more certainty and with more authority? How do I articulate my value? Like, that would be it. But there's nothing to maintain if you're, in my opinion, if you're making less than $100,000 a year, because you got to plant the seeds to actually produce a harvest. So I actually did a series on my podcast where it was like it was like the CEO seasons. I highly, highly, highly recommend listening to part 1 if you're making less than $100,000 a year, because it really breaks down like what's required, what you should focus on, and what you don't need to be worried about during that season. But there's nothing to maintenance. There's nothing to maintenance. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. Like I said, I hope this episode just gave you some good fruit and gave you some good thoughts. My podcast name is Jereshia Said. Jereshia Said. So you can click the link in my bio and get to it. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify. But it is Jereshia Said. You can find the podcast. You can go to my website and find it. It's everywhere. But listen to the CEO. There's 5 parts to the CEO seasons. Part 1 is 0 to 100,000. Part 2 is 100 to 300,000. Part 3 is 300,000 to $1 million. Part 4 is like $1 million plus. And it really just talks about, okay, these are the different seasons of business that you're going to go through. This is what's required of you at each season. This is what you need to be focused on in each season. These are the decisions that you need to be thinking through at each season. So if you're in the baby season, and I don't even want to call it baby season, like you're just in like the beginning. If you're making less than $100,000, I'd highly, highly, highly encourage you to go listen to that episode, because it'll get you together. Okay, it'll gather you and get you together. But thank you guys for tuning in. I'll chat with you guys soon, and have a good rest of your day, y'all.